Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We are going to finish off this week of dark ambience looking at music that is both dark and ambient. We've only had one track this week, I think, that has been in the dark ambient genre. We'll see if that changes today. We're going to be checking out LOR3L3I, which is actually the solo project of Heikki Langhans, which is the previous lead singer of Draconian and ex-singer of Ison, and a current singer of Remina and Lightfield Reverie. So, let's get into this. See what's going on with LOR3L3I's Leave Me Behind, Leave Me. I don't know where I was going to get behind from. LOR3L3I's Leave Me.
Sweep away the letters lying by the door. Hide away those reoccurring tears once more. Everything is silent. The room is void and sound. With every passing hour, time is letting her down. Telephone fragments lay scattered on the floor. No words to make it better. She's heard it all before.
Really interesting vocal layering.
Staring in the mirror, and beauty come and gone. Bewildered and broken, she fades away alone. Left her burden with the years of sorrow. She'll take it to the grave and lay the sadness to rest. Don't leave her flowers, just leave her alone. She needs to find the answers far away from home. And don't stand in bitter judgment at the truth she won't untie. Don't tell her not to suffer, and don't tell her not to cry. There's no absolution, as the blood still taints her hair. Scars might be invisible, but the wounds are still there.
I like that harmony right there.
With the years of misery, she'll take him to the grave and lay the heartache to rest. Don't seek forgiveness, just leave her to mend. She needs to find the answers. She needs to find the end.
heavy reverb on that too, which is something I alluded to a little bit previously, but didn't touch on. Interesting. So that piano riff, ostinato, whatever you want to call it, the loop, it has a built-in resolution. And I honestly thought when we hit that final return to home, about 3 seconds before the end of the track, that that was where it was going to end, but it's also the start of the loop. It is both the finality and the beginning. And so it very easily starts the repetition again, but that's just not where I thought it was going. And instead, we play all the way up to that, and the fade out actually ends at the end of the bar, not on beat one of the next bar where we would find our resolution. It literally ends right before we get that full resolution of the track, of the progression. I don't know what to read into that. Was it intentional? Did we purposefully leave off the resolution? Because if it was just a fade out, normally we would have those fading out in the middle of an idea. It's very interesting to fade out at the very end of a bar. It's a very clean fade out. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't read as what fade outs typically do, which is an endless element to the cycle. That this feeling, this emotion, the vibe that we're listening to is never going to end, or that it functions in cycles and it will repeat endlessly, or something like that. There's a finality to it. The song does end at the end of the bar. We do get the end of the riff. We just don't get that resolution that comes on beat one of the next. It's purposefully, it seems, excluded, which is interesting because it uses a fade out not to confer endlessness or a cycle, but it also has a finite point at the end of the track that pushes away from or doesn't allow the song to resolve. It's a very interesting decision. Um, and I may be reading too much into it. But I can't help it. I have so many questions um, about that ending and what thought process went into crafting it or what it means to the artist or stuff like that. It just seems to subvert a lot of ideas, I think is what I'm getting at, or a lot of general convention. Yeah. All right, let's talk about the rest though. This is a static track. There are some peaks and valleys to it, but they're rather static peaks and valleys. Each of the peaks is identical. Each of the low points are identical. There is three instruments here, right? We have the piano, which is present from beginning to end. It's the first instrument we hear. It's the last instrument we hear, and it has one idea: a four-bar chord progression that's played with quarter notes, quarter homophonic notes. I don't think we ever get any chords from the piano. It's always one note at a time, but the four notes per bar indicate the chord. And so there's isolation there. The piano is a polyphonic instrument. We never get to hear it in that capacity. Um, we put vocals on top of that for a majority of the track, and occasionally we'll get a violin. And the violin's interesting. The vocals are interesting too, but I think first I want to touch on the violin because it does something the other two don't, which is a delayed attack. If you listen to the violin, especially closer to the end when there aren't vocals, it's just violin and the piano, you can really hear the violin coming in after the beat. I do believe that the keyboard key is being pressed down on the beat, but there is a swell into the peak of the note when we hit max volume, right? And it doesn't happen as soon as the button is pressed. So it almost sounds like the note comes in after the beat, and this is exceptionally evident. Like I mentioned, when the vocals are removed and we're looking at just the violin on top of the piano. And there's a lethargy to this. There's a couple of ways to get around this if your sample library only functions with this swell, which I've had to deal with um, in my own writing with the libraries that I've used in the past. And you can either play ahead of it, ahead of the beat, so that when it hits the peak, it hits on the downbeat, or you can play it like this and then drag what you've recorded a little bit previous to make it line up. But none of that was utilized here. It all was left in, which is interesting because to me it implies a type of dragging. Every element of this track seems to evoke a specific characteristic. The piano is very isolation oriented. It's by itself. It never gets to play multiple notes on its own. There's never any harmony with what it's doing. The violin comes in and it's dragging. It's behind the beat. There's a reluctance to hit that note, and it refuses to do so on the time that the rest of the band is, or the rest of the instruments are, I should say. Um, it wants to pull the song backwards in tempo. And of course, if the song slows down, that doesn't change the violin coming in late. It will always come in late because it swells. So it is a literal wanting to drag it down. There is no point where they will finally say, oh, now we're at the tempo I want to play at. The violin will always be behind the beat. So it's just this constant pull to make the song slower and slower and slower until it doesn't move. It's that reluctance, that hesitance to move forward. It does occasionally harmonize with the piano, but it's never a really strong harmony in that it lasts for a while. The piano's typically moving on to the next note every beat, and the violin also has some moving lines as well. It holds some notes occasionally for an entire bar. Other times we get half of a bar each. So it doesn't always want to move forward either, move to the next note, but it also is hesitant to stay on one note for very long. And so there are moments of harmony, usually just a beat long between these two instruments, but they never hit a point of pure harmonization where they're playing the same line and harmonizing off of each other like that. There are always two voices that sometimes randomly happen to work together, but for the most part don't. It's more of a coincidence than an intentional component of their writing. So the isolation of the piano is consistent. There's also, though, this separation, is gulf between two elements that should work together and occasionally prove they work together very well, but they can't ever cross that bridge to make it fully function. And so that brings us to the vocals, which I think are interesting here because if everything else is singular, the solo violin playing single notes and the solo keyboard playing single notes, The vocals are a cacophony of harmony, of overlapping ideas. There's too much going on at once, that muddies up the vocals at times. And this is going to kind of bleed over into production more than musicianship, because the singing quality itself was fine. I think I've heard her sing with Draconian. We've checked out Draconian before, I think. Um, and there's nothing that I remember from that, nor the vocals here that I would say is bad. The singing itself that actually goes into the microphone is solid. The production of the vocals is where things get interesting. There are multiple layers of vocals. Sometimes they're harmonizing with each other with similar timbre, where she's using very similar muscle structure. She's placing she's placing the voice in the same place of her mouth, whether it's in the back or the front. The only difference is pitch. So we get really similar sounds. They're just harmonizing in pitch. But then there's another way that she sings that's a bit higher, and the placement is more at the front of the mouth, and it feels distinct from the other harmonizations that we get, but it also harmonizes. It sings the same line at a higher range than our bass line. Um, it is a harmonized line, but the timbre is different. And I thought that was really interesting to include a harmonized line with a similar timbre and a harmonized line with a distinct timbre. The distinct one didn't show up too often, but when it did, it was very clearly heard against the rest of the vocal stuff. There's also whispers going on throughout here that are usually panned hard right or left. There's also reverb and echo going on as well, which maybe those whispers were also an echo from something earlier. I can't be 100% sure that they weren't. And so we end up with a ton of reverb on multiple vocal recordings, which all the reverbs kind of muddy things up. It is very easy to hear this in the very first verse, when we just have the two vocals in the second half of the verse, if I remember correctly. And they're not purely copy pasted vocals. It is a recording of a second track at a higher range, and there's a little bit of timing differences between them, which is 100% what you would want. There's a reason that vocalists tend to re-record themselves, even if it's the same exact pitches, and they try their best to match inflections and stuff like that when they go to double track, rather than just copying what you've recorded and pasting it in another track. You want those little nuances to give it extra width. But here, we're taking those little nuances and amplifying them and causing them to have massive widths to them, a little bit of reverb, a little bit of echo at times. And what it does is it takes all those little differences between the two recorded lines and makes those differences very apparent. They don't kind of blend in with each other and make this singular sound. You now have two distinct voices with separate attacks and releases and inflections and minor variations of muscles that are all in here that contribute to how the singing is done. And it becomes cacophonous at moments. It's not always a major problem, and I think if you're not really listening to it, it probably isn't something you notice, but if you key into it, it's really easy for the vocals to not be this unified sound, but to be a bunch of distinct voices fighting for superiority, fighting for that spotlight. It's even worse when we get the third voice in there during some of the chorus work or the whispers, or when the echoes start shining through and now you have singing over reverbed echoes from previous lines that you sang, and it can become, I don't want to call it a mess, but it becomes very muddied. It's very difficult for me to hear exactly what's going on because there's so many elements at play here. And the massive reverb isn't helping either. The reverb is just making everything even more muddier. And so it's this interesting schism, or even contrast, we could call it, between the isolation of the instruments, single notes, single instruments, and all of these vocal elements coming together here in the middle. Um, and I don't know what the reasoning for it is, which I think is kind of a weird way to word that, but because I don't ever know anything on this channel, I just have my interpretation of things. To know, I think, would require knowledge of authorial intent. You can know why somebody did something, but everything else is going to be your opinion or your experience. It's not really knowledge as much as it is an interpretation. But I don't have an interpretation for it. It feels like such an interesting choice. And paired with all the other interesting choices going on, the instruments, the ending, um, it makes me think that it's all intentional. Because it does come together in a way that works. Like I had mentioned, if you aren't really paying attention to any of this and you're just enjoying the atmosphere of the track, I think you're just going to enjoy this song and not have any extra thoughts about it. But the minute you start digging deeper, there's a lot of micro decisions that go into this track that, at least to me, are a bit unusual compared to similar music and similar the way that people would create similar sounding songs. It makes it feel intentional. I'm honestly curious what the authorial intention is for this track. Why some of these decisions were made by Heike and what they mean to her, or possibly her producer. I Oh, nope. Says Heike did everything on this track, so I'm going to assume also production and mixing and stuff like that. I'm curious what it all means to her, if there's any specific reason for it, or if she went into it mixing how I mix, which is twist a knob and see if it sounds good. Because I don't understand how to have intention in all of my production, uh, mostly because I'm not a very good producer. It's one of those skills I'm still building on. Um, but yeah, that's me walking away from this. It's a good darker pop track. I don't know if I would call it dark ambient, especially comparative to the rest of this week, which has been really eerie and creepy and weighty. That sort of dark. This has a darkness to it, but at the end of the day, it feels closer to a pop song, which isn't, tossing shade to the song itself. It's just that within this week's theme and the other tracks that I have sort of compartmentalized with this one for this dark ambient theme, it certainly sounds out of place for that. But on its own, in a vacuum or within the larger context of her works or this album itself, I would not say that there's anything wrong or odd about the song itself. It's just within this context of this theme that it definitely stands out a bit. But it is ambient, has very little movement, has one. It's basically an A section with a vocal variation on it. Because I did call it verse chorus, but honestly, the instruments don't carry a verse chorus idea. It's just kind of verse all the way through. But yeah, it's a good pop song. I enjoyed my time with it casually, but critically, boy, I'm curious about stuff. We're gonna hit the lyrics here, and then we'll wrap this up. It makes total sense that she ended up being a singer for a goth metal band because lyrically she fits right in with a lot of the goth metal we've checked out on the channel. And as usual, as I say with most of those lyrics as well, in the most endearing way, this is some phenomenal emo stuff right here. I'm loving it. I, I'm I'm sure that if I had, I mean, I couldn't have discovered this when I was a 20 something because this song is only 4-ish months home. Well, no, The video was released 4 months ago, but it looks like this demo came out in 2020. This song was specifically written and recorded in 2009, though, which, if I don't know if it was released. No, it was released in 2020, yeah, so she kept it to herself. So that's pretty cool. She was writing a lot of these demos while she was in these other bands. That's neat. I'm down for. I love it when, people have one outlet, but it's not the outlet for them, for all of them. You know, you're in a metal band, you got these metal lyrics, but you also want to make electronic music, and it doesn't fit with your primary project, so you do it on the side. I'm a huge fan of that. It always shows depth of character when you require more than one outlet for your art. Um, but yeah, if I had found this in 2009, if she had released it at that time rather than holding on to it, I would have been all over this. These lyrics are right up my alley. So, anyways, it is about a person who has been hurt emotionally, and well, the I don't know what the and is. There's a lot of mention of the pain, the grief, the what's another word they use? Misery, agony that she carries with her. It might be speaking of a few different situations that have left her with these various nouns: the misery, the agony, the sorrow. But that's actually a recurring idea. Left her burdened with years of blank, she'll take it to the grave. Where blank is sorrow one time, misery another time, agony another time. Says she'll take it to the grave. So she holds on to all this negativity and bottles it up. And she only feels vulnerable when she's alone. She talks about staring in the mirror and needing to be left alone. The track is called Leave Me, but the phrase just leave her alone happens quite a few times in here. It also speaks to a recurrence of this. It says, telephone fragments lay scattered on the floor, no words to make it better. She's heard it all before. So this isn't her first time with this emotional pain. It talks about how it affects her in a very serious way. Uh, the scars might be invisible, but the wounds are still there, it says. Um, but there is the and what she carries all of this and does what is the action that she takes. And I think this is interesting because so much of this song is about stuff done to her, and it doesn't really speak to her agency other than her choice to bottle this up and to keep it with her until she takes it to the grave, as she says. um and that's kind of it. That's the whole song. It's about somebody who bottles up their pain and doesn't feel comfortable showing it to people, but she does feel it at one point. Um, well, she says, "Don't stand in bitter judgment. Don't tell her not to suffer. Don't tell her not to cry." When she's ready to feel this stuff and engage with it, she will. But don't tell her she's wrong for how she deals with it, right? But there is this recurring thing. She needs to find the end. And it always comes pretty close to the idea of taking it to the grave. At one point, it says, "Don't leave her flowers, just leave her alone. She needs to find the answers far away from home." And the next time this comes around, says, "Don't seek forgiveness, just leave her to mend. She needs to find the answers. She needs to find the end." And like I said, both times this comes after the line of she'll take it to the grave, which I might be reading wrong into this, but it seems to have a dark connotation lyrically. Now, interestingly, the song ends on the line, "Don't leave her stranded, but just leave her be," which I think is really important because it speaks to the whole confusion of isolation here. A lot of this song says leave me alone, but that's not actually what our protagonist wants, or our narrator. Oh, no, not the narrator. The narrator's in third person. So it's not what our main character wants. They do want to be left alone to deal with this, but they don't want to be left alone entirely. They just want space so they can deal with it on their own. It says, don't leave her stranded, but just leave her be. In time, you'll know the answers, for she is me. And that makes me think that this is a bit more autobiographical than the third person narration lets on, which makes the song, or at least the lyrics, very personal, which really makes me question some of the production qualities that are going on in here. There is an isolation here, which is our instruments trying to bridge that gap, but never really quite making it, and constantly being alone, which being alone is a very core theme of this track. But as we see in that third and final chorus, actually doesn't want to be alone. And it's possible that all of the voices going on in the vocal aspect and the cluttered element of that could be a mental state. Maybe they have, um, I don't want to say voices in their head, but they have words of, what is the opposite of encouragement? Words of destruction in their minds. Their own worst enemy kind of vibe. They're pretty good at bringing themselves down, kind of thing. And it could also just be conflicting ideas. You want to be alone, but you want to be with people. You don't want to be left alone. And maybe that's like the conflict there, where you kind of, you know what you want, you know what you need, but you don't know how to achieve it. You might not know how to word it to other people. And that's sort of the chaos of the mind going on with all the vocal elements. I don't know. I feel like I'm grasping at straws a little bit here, but I have so many. I need to know why the production is the way it is. Why does it end like that, though? That's like some of this begins to make more sense in the context of the lyrics, but the ending is still, I think, it slips through my fingertips. I think is it. I can see it, and I go to grab it, and just I miss it. Those are my thoughts on Lorelai's "Leave Me." What did you think of this track? Did you enjoy it? Was there anything that stood out to you? Maybe there was something that I missed completely, or you have your own perspective on things. Please tell me in the comments section. Above the comments, in the description box, find a link to Linktree. Takes you to this page. It has ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, links to my music, and so much more. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, we have 2 more videos today as we do on Fridays. Stick around for those if you're interested. Special selection and a creator request. Tomorrow we have an album drop, album review, sorry, as usual. Sunday we'll do a live stream with the patrons in the morning. I'll try to get it out by Sunday evening for everyone else. Monday we'll be back with next week's theme. Alright, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.